you for coming to the session about Atlassian's open source program. Kind of like Luke talked about, I'm going to cover what we've been doing, what we're currently doing, and what we plan on doing in the future, and give you a little insight into some of the changes that have taken place in the last few months. I joined Atlassian back in February, and one of my responsibilities is kind of the steward of our open source program within the company. I use that word specifically because we don't try to kind of force everything through all decisions to one person in the company. We're trying to actually share the responsibility across the organization. So I'm just kind of the shepherd in the company trying to kind of move open source along within the business. How many folks here have actually used any of our open source projects or been involved in any of them, or even know that we have open source projects at Atlassian? A few, which is kind of expected. In the past, it's been kind of buried, where to go find our projects. Our story's been kind of fragmented. That's been part of our problem, part of the challenge that we've been facing. How many folks here also are aware that we give out licenses to open source projects within the larger community? It's pretty much about the same, which is kind of also not surprising because, again, that's been kind of a bit of a fragmented story for us. And really, that's kind of the history of our past. So Atlassian has been open source since the very start of the company. Both Mike and Scott used open source projects when they began to help grow the company, help build it. We've contributed to open source projects all along, ever since those early days as well, and we still continue to be large contributors to other projects and release code on our own as well. What we haven't really did a great job of back even from those early days to today is really talk about that and share those stories with a larger world. And that's something that we kind of recognize as a problem and something we wanted to go and fix. But we've always been supporters of open source and have contributed large amount of projects out there in the world as well as contributions. So currently, we did an assessment recently and we figured out we have over 190 open source projects that Atlassian contribute. And we contribute to a ton of more other people's projects as well. Some big, some small. Some of our communities are big and some of our communities are very small as well. But we are constantly adding more and more projects out there. But most folks, even internally within our own company, didn't know we had 190 active projects. Likewise, the same thing goes with offering up open source licenses. If you're an open source project, we actually can give away licenses to your project to allow you to take advantage of our different products. We actually have done quite a few projects that we're big supporters of. Just some examples of a few that are out there. But we also do, pretty much any size, kind of like what Scott was talking about earlier today too. Foundations, student organizations. I mean, really kind of, there's a lot of ways that companies and individuals can get access to our products without necessarily buying large seat licenses, especially if you're kind of a new or younger open source project. We have means to go and help different projects grow and get off the ground. So the big story for us is that we started off very small, again, two proverbial and literal guys in a garage. And then we have grown that up to a much bigger scale company now, well over 1,100 employees, all over the world, working on quite a few different projects. And in that time, we've kind of transitioned from two guys in a garage to one person being in control to taking that model and saying we've got to break it down. And how do we now put in place a new model that allows a much more larger company with a lot more people invested in it to support open source projects and keep that going. And that's where we are, where we find ourselves today. So for the last few months, what we've been doing is we've been going through an effort to clean up all of our projects. So this has involved us coming up with a standard license and getting all of our projects to start migrating, to identifying those 190 active projects and get them hopefully in one place and allow people to discover all of that. We've been cleaning up the way that everyone can go, well, what the projects are about. You'd be surprised, a lot of our projects lacked readmes, didn't explain anything about what they could be used for, and we've been doing that. As well as just even little details like getting a contribution agreement in place so people can actually figure out how to add to our projects, how to go through that process. So we've spent probably about 50 to 60% of our time just cleaning up our open source program and getting it out there. The other part of it is kind of, we've relaunched an external website which went live yesterday at Atlassian.com/open source, and I'll take you to our new open source website. But as part of this process of relaunching, we also went through and we added to how we were cleaning up all the projects, and we figured out a way that we can scale with the entire business of letting everyone take in responsibilities for managing open source within the company. So one thing we do is our open source program, we run it like an open source project. I'm the steward of the project. There's a woman named Mandy Black who's our program manager and driving it. But we are opened up the project for the entirely within the company and allow everyone in the company to contribute to what we're trying to get done with the open source program. So our contribution agreement, our code of conduct, that was opened up to everybody to contribute to, add comments, help us improve it, and before we turned around and put it out in on the new website. Likewise, with all of our projects, we have come with a distributed model where now each of the projects follow a shared process that we develop together on how do we decide a new chunk of code is going to go into an open source project. But they themselves are the responsibility for going and deciding to promote it. So we've pushed out to almost all the teams and organizations in the company their own self-review processes so they can determine whether this is something that's valid and should be out there. And we then, in turn, on the open source program team, give them the support and the tools to manage that, whether that's a legal review or whether that's something to do with the process, and soon, hopefully, a lot more around the website, giving them promotion and support. But our job, we really see now, is to give them the conduit rather than be any kind of gatekeeper, which in a lot of other companies is kind of the opposite. They try to consolidate everything down within a single program. With us, we felt like it's much better if we distribute out and let our teams be the ones to be able to figure out what goes out into a larger community. And that is really what's giving us the ability to scale. You know, that was one of the things we realized when we have so many projects, so much stuff going on within the company. Having that all funneled through one single program, one single person for the review was just not scalable. It wasn't going to really help support the company growth. So to illustrate some of that, I'd like to talk about a few of our projects, and just to kind of give you a feel for the kinds of projects that we have, how we're running these, and what they kind of are doing with their communities. The first one is a project called Jitsi, Jitsi Video Bridge. We acquired this company in March. Well, we acquired a separate company who built this project and supported it and still runs it to this day. So Jitsi, for those who are not familiar, is a video bridge technology. It's a way of distributing audio and video through WebRTC connections, but with a very low bandwidth, or a very low CPU cost. Bandwidth is always variable, depends on the quality. And Jitsi is great for any type of organization or any type of developer who's looking to have a WebRTC-enabled application, supporting one-to-one video, group video, or screen sharing, or audio for that matter. And this project was built by a team, small team out of Europe. They're now part of a larger company, but we have kept the project alive. There are dozens of companies, not just us, but companies like Comcast and Thinking Phones and quite a few others who are building video offerings on top of that, as well as individuals. There are a number of people out there who have taken the video bridge installation, have set it up just for their own conferencing purposes internally within their companies, and don't actually build on top of it. They just use it for their own purposes. And the great thing about it is that all of them are continuing to contribute to the project. In fact, quite a few of them, now that Atlassian is major backer and support of this, like Comcast, have come to the table and are contributing significant chunks of code they weren't doing before, because now they see that there's a kind of structured roadmap that other people have vested, like such as Atlassian, to make sure that this program continues to operate. So Emil Ivov, who was the gentleman who started this all, continues to remain as kind of the chairman of the program, and he's continuing to drive it forward. He now runs a regular roadmap review with all of the other organizations that are involved, sharing what we're doing with it and the code that we're contributing back, and in turn helping them understand like a shared roadmap that we can all continue to add to and continue to build out our capabilities on what Jitsi can bring. And right now, it will change probably over time, but 85% of the code is actually contributed by us. And this is one way that we're giving back to this larger communities. We're still writing most of the code for this. Over time, a lot of these other folks are going to be contributing pretty big chunks as well, which is pretty exciting. And this team drives all that decision making right now. They figure out with these other organizations what do they want to do and where do they want to take this project. Another one is AWI. So AWI is a project that we've had out in open source for a while now. This project is specifically geared toward allowing developers to go and take advantage of Atlassian design guidelines for plugins and anything else that they're kind of building that fits within our network. This project is interesting because it not only brings the Atlassian design guidelines to you, but it also has a lot of accessibility standards built into it as well to make our plugins compliant. And anybody can go and utilize this or contribute back to this project in order to help rapidly build a plugin. So if you're a developer who wants to kind of focus more on the underpinnings and less on how you fit in with the Atlassian design guidelines, this is a great one that everyone can go and utilize. The team behind this is a small group down out of Sydney, but they're continuously building on it and adding to it and trying to figure out how they can meet the needs of both our own internal use cases as well as external. So we use this ourselves. It's our foundation for building out our own plugins, and it is one that we open sourced up and allow others to do. One thing that they've been working on is trying to figure out how to abstract the layer of the Atlassian design guides and allow the framework to be utilized in any other way on any other project. That's ongoing, and they haven't quite gotten it down yet, but it is something that they're currently working on. And then lastly, Atlassian Connect. Now, Connect in and of itself is not an open source project at the largest level, but a lot of components of Connect are open source, and there's a lot of pieces that we do to help continue to grow. And I just had a conversation earlier today about potentially by next year getting much more of Atlassian Connect open sourced. I was talking with one of our colleagues about it. And HipChat Connect is a great example. Like we intend to release a lot of HipChat Connect under open source. We just kind of like timing with Summit and getting it out there in beta has kind of slowed us down a little bit, but we want to have a lot of the plugins open sourced so that way people can continue to add to them and contribute to them, but in addition use them as reference design so they can build their own HipChat Connect plugins. Many components of Connect can be found in our same repos that we're using in Bitbucket and elsewhere around where we have all the other OpenSet projects as well. At this time, chunks of it are read-only, and so you can't quite contribute back, but we intend to change that. But they're certainly there as examples for anyone to go and utilize, and that team is definitely open to feedback. And many of the plugins in our community are actually open source. So this is just a sampling of some of the plugins that are true open source projects. Anybody can go and follow along with them, contribute back to them. They're plugins that are in the community for others to go and utilize. You all can use it on your own installations. And what's interesting is that many of these have thousands and thousands of installs. These are not just like single one-off, something build it for a project for themselves. A lot of these are being used very widespread by a lot of our customers. And some of the developers who've built these have done it because they're an open source project and they feel like that's what they should do. Others have done it in order to help support the community and provide tooling so that they don't have to necessarily go buy a commercial version. They can use one of the open source solutions that exist. So where are we going with this is the kind of next interesting step. Like I said, our mission was let's get ourselves cleaned up. Let's get something in place that we can start to scale as a company. We recognize that it just wasn't going to continue to work the way we wanted it to. We took a lot of other open source projects that are out there and companies and tried to see how they were doing it. And what we saw was interesting, but didn't quite necessarily fit the Atlassian model. We were built around teams. We want to continue to support teams, even internally within our company, and that's kind of the philosophy behind the open source project internally within the company. In order to do that, we had to launch a new website. Like I mentioned, it just went live. That's why the URL is missing here, because we didn't actually have the URL nailed down until Friday of last week, and this was submitted before Friday. So the URL is atlassian.com/open source, and it now gives you direct access. So it looks a little bit different than that, but it gives you direct access to some of our key projects. We're going to be featuring more of them as well over time, as well as start to highlight some of our teams and the people and individuals who are behind those projects, because that's what Atlassian's all about, is the teams at the end of the day, and we want to make sure that you can get to know who some of those people are who are contributing. And then likewise, we can give you direct access to things like our code of conduct, or contributor license agreement, or if you are an open source project, to the ability to go request a license and be able to use in your own projects. And we'll keep adding more and more to the site as well. So we just launched it. We're getting it off the ground, and we're adding more to it. The big thing that we're going to probably be doing next is really rotating through a lot of our projects, and then we'll also be looking at some of our the potential people in our larger Atlassian community, like some of the ecosystem partners who write their own open source plugins, and see how we can help feature those and promote those as part of the site, and tell the stories of what all the teams are doing with our open source projects. We also have the Atlassian Bitbucket website, where you can go and you can actually get direct access to all the repos. The great thing is if you have a Bitbucket account already, you actually have already signed a contributor agreement. It's kind of part of our standard license when you go and create your user account. So you can jump right in and you can go and start creating and contributing projects right away. You'll find from this URL access to all of the different projects that we have hosted up there on Bitbucket, which is the vast majority of those 190. We do have a few up on GitHub. Their Jitsi is actually started on GitHub. It's still going to remain there. So we do have a few that are there too. But the bulk of them are on Bitbucket, and you can definitely get access to any of them from there. And we'll continue to add to more of them there. So if you're interested, keep watching it, keep looking at what we've got. And that's kind of the main point of the presentation, was just to kind of give you all a highlight of where we're going and what we've got. Hopefully that was of interest to everybody, and happy to hear any questions, answer any questions I can around Atlassian's open source, what we're doing, and where we're going next with it.
Okay, I have a few questions from the app here.
Sure.
Are we planning to open source any of our software?
Interesting question. So actually, it's kind of a yes and a no answer to that one. We are, and we're continuing to do so. We actually, if you are a license holder of Jira and Confluence, you actually can get access to some of our source code already. With some of our new projects, like I said with Connect, we're trying to figure out how we can contribute more and start to share more. And talking with Scott, he would love to see us push more and more out to the open source community and as much of our core products as possible. We sort of do also with some of our other projects, like Jitsi, for instance, has a client that they use to connect to their backend video bridge, which is completely open source as a client. We don't actively use it internally within the company, but it is there, and there are other projects that have similar components as well that are fully open already.
Okay, and the other one I have here is, why is Jira Log Analyzer not open sourced?
I don't know the answer to that one. That's a very specific one. I don't know the answer, but I can definitely find out. Whoever asked that question can come up afterwards and give me your email, and I'll try to find out an answer for you.
Cool. Any other just from the room here? So, okay. Well, sorry?
Who determines what the projects will be? Can we spurn our own projects up and create, or is it through sort of a set determination of what the projects will be?
So the question is, just to rephrase, is can you make your own open source projects and have Atlassians contribute to them? I don't see why not.
Yeah, no, I'm sure.
We have, there's actually a large number of plugins in the marketplace that are open source that Atlassians have both open sourced and contributed to. So,
And internally, it's the same way. I mean, any of our employees can do it as like part of a ship it, or they can do it as part of their normal job. To give you an example, as a gentleman on HipChat, Sam Whited, he was really passionate about releasing an XMPP component, and he worked with us just to kind of clear through any legal hurdles, and then went out to the larger XMPP community and kind of went through that process to get it part of the standard and released. And that was just something that he kind of really wanted to champion and wanted to drive. And then in terms of Atlassian working with others, I mean, we're happy to hear about it. Like we mentioned, there's a lot of plugins that are already in the community that are open source, and we'll continue to try to figure out how to support those as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, folks. We have a really cool Jira Service Desk talk happening here in about 15 minutes, or actually about a half hour. So
sorry, give me back 30 minutes of your life.
So there you go. Enjoy it. Thanks.